one guy who's built an amazing team himself is Ryan Caldbeck. There are so many brands here who've raised funds through CircleUp or who are considering it that our next speaker needs no introduction. In fact, here he is. Ryan is only one of the speakers we're about to hear from. The second is Helio, and it's actually the voice of machine learning. Ryan's here to interpret that voice for us as it applies to building a sound beverage company.
Great. Thank you very much. First of all, just a big thank you to Jeff. And I want to say this is my favorite consumer conference. And I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, the quality of the people that come here and the opportunity to just talk with other people is just so much better here than it is at any other conference. When Jeff first called me about giving this talk, I was extremely hesitant. And the reason I was really hesitant to do it is we worry sometimes that this talk is very boring to other people. It's a lot about data. It's a lot about machine learning. So if you want to tune out and only remember one thing, it's that there are a lot of people in the industry that are using this data or data like it to make decisions. So if you're an entrepreneur, the retailers you're talking to are using technology or data that is consistent with what we're talking about. 5 or 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. We've had every major retailer and every major CPG strategic in our office in the last 12 months talking about this. So if you only take away one thing, it's that people are using data. And if you're not, you're likely being overtaken by someone else that is. So let's go through. The first part of this talk is just talking through exactly what CircleUp is doing with data and then why it may or may not be relevant to you. So first, a little background. CircleUp is a technology company based in San Francisco, 5 years old. My background before this was working in consumer-focused private equity, TSG Consumer Partners, and Encore Consumer Capital. We've helped raise about $350 million for early-stage consumer companies, so we only focus on companies with kind of 1 to 15 million in revenue. That's our sweet spot. The reason that I started this is because I wanted to help entrepreneurs to thrive. I got really frustrated in private equity that great companies, like the ones that were just on this stage, would come to us in private equity and just, like a rubber stamp, we would say, too small, go raise from friends and family. Every single time. And that was just really, really painful. First of all, it's painful as an investor because you see these companies end up doing really well, but they're just too small to invest in for a larger fund. It's also painful because you want to help an entrepreneur to achieve their dreams. We built it because although this is a massive industry, in this case we're talking about beverage, but more broadly CPG, food, personal care, beverage, pet, et cetera, it's a massive space, but the problem is that investing is an extremely manual process. So if you're Trevor Nelson from ACG, a phenomenal firm, you're getting on a plane, you're flying to, let's say, Expo West or wherever to learn about a company, then you fly to another state to go visit that company. It's a really long and painful process. That math makes sense when you're writing a $20 million check. It doesn't make any sense at all when you're writing a $1 million check. So although it's a huge industry, it receives very little capital at the early stage. The bottom right, that's $7 billion. If you try to Google early stage consumer funds, you won't find 10 in the country. It's usually friends and family. Again, it's because of this geographic dispersion. Unlike, let's say, the technology space, we're a technology company, all the tech companies are in New York and San Francisco. In consumer, they're just as likely to be in Omaha or New York as they are Florida or California or Texas. That makes finding and evaluating them really difficult. So you go to these trade shows, we do it through data. So Helio is a series of machine learning algorithms and data sets that pull in a tremendous amount of data to find and evaluate consumer companies. So on a monthly basis, we track about 1.2 million consumer and retail companies. So it's every company you've ever seen at Whole Foods, certainly, or Target, or Costco. It's also every company you've ever seen at one bodega in New York City, or one beauty store in LA, one pet store in Texas. It's every single one of those companies. We then pull in a ton of data about those companies. And a lot of people ask us where the data comes from. And the answer is it's hundreds and hundreds of data sets. We would tell you, but it's kind of obvious if you just Google. So Google any one of the brands that are just on this stage. The ones that have gotten distribution are not trying to hide where they are. And if you're in Whole Foods or in another retailer, the retailer often isn't trying to hide what's in their store. So we track where they're sold, how many SKUs they have, the price points of the SKUs, what the end users are saying about the products, all of that data and much, much more. It ends up being literally trillions of pieces of data for any individual company. It's a bit kind of mind-blowing. To give you a rough sense of scale, we spend about $500,000 a year just to store the data, just literally in storage costs. And so we use that and the algorithms that sit on top of it to try and mimic the investor's mind. So what we do is we have algorithms that look at the strength of the brand, the product, the distribution, the team itself, estimate the financial performance, and try to get a sense of whether or not we believe the company will have an exit. That absolutely may sound like magic. Some of the smartest data scientists and engineers in the world would tell you after digging into it, it's not magic, it's working pretty effectively. But it's because there's so much data in this space. And what I want to impress upon you guys again is whether or not you think CircleUp is magic or real, the retailers that a lot of you are working with believe very strongly in the importance of using this type of data. So I asked one of our data scientists. We've got about 50 people at CircleUp, about half of whom are on the technology team, engineers and data scientists. I asked one of the data scientists to pull together some insights on early stage beverage companies from our data. And what you'll see is that some of the insights might be intuitive to you. Some of them don't make any sense at all. Some of them might not actually really be insights. We might just be wrong. A lot of what we do, all of what we do, is not perfect. There are holes, there are inaccuracies, but we're able to find some things that we do think are valuable. So let's talk about those. One of the insights that we have, which may be intuitive to a lot of you, is that highly distinctive products do better with consumers. So let's just take a step back. Think of the most successful consumer companies of the last 10 years, in any category. Think about the ones that have actually had successful exits. What you'll see is that they often have two common things. One is a brand that really resonates with the consumer. It has some intensity to it. We can talk about how we measure that. Another is a product that's just different. It's unique. If it's a Me Too product, it tends to not do very well, other than just by cutting price, and then you're in a race to the bottom. And some of the panelists up here, the judges, talked about that when they were talking about some of the companies. There has to be something unique. So one of our algorithms literally just looks at whether or not the product is unique, different from the mean. We look at a picture of the package, the computer deconstructs it, puts it back together, and says how different is that from the rest of the category. We also look at the ingredient deck and the nutritional profile and say how different are those. And what we find is that the companies that are different tend to do better. Now, just because you're different doesn't mean you will do better. So if we add chicken to the beverage, probably not going to do better, right? But it's very hard to do well unless you're different. So we look for things that are first different and then look for other dimensions as well. Another insight, which this one I'm still kind of debating whether or not I fully believe it, is if you look at companies that were founded before 2012, so older companies, the team tends to be less important than companies that have been founded since. So brand is important no matter what, which is probably going to be intuitive to everyone here. If you don't have a strong brand, really hard to be successful. But companies that are older, teams a little bit less important. Well, why could that be? Well, one answer is because the company, as it grows up, it builds more of an institution. There's a larger company. It is less reliant on, let's say, the founder or the senior executive team, because there's more of the company out there. It has a broader base. That could be one reason, or it might just be wrong. This last one, which is by far my least favorite, although our data scientist is adamant about this, is if you look at the ratings of a company on the y-axis and how many SKUs they have on the x-axis, you see that companies tend to have a dip as they get to kind of a maturation stage. So when you first start and you launch 1 or 2 or 5 products, you're really ingrained in those products and you're determined to make those work. The ratings for that company are higher. At some point, though, there might be SKU proliferation before you've put in place the institutional infrastructure to make sure that each new additional SKU meets a quality bar. And so the ratings go down. And so how could you use this as an entrepreneur? So when we work with entrepreneurs, we try to talk to them about how we use data and how the data can be helpful to them. Well, if you believed this, and you heard my caveat on this particular slide, but if you believed this, then you might say, well, we need to begin to understand how to get ahead of that curve and prepare for it, right? And prepare that and begin to understand that after about kind of 5, 10 SKUs, the quality across literally tens of thousands of companies goes down pretty meaningfully. So what's important to remember is when you see these slides, we're not doing this off of an N of 10 or 20. Oftentimes when you talk to investors, they're giving you insights based off of their experience, which might be off of looking at 10, 20, 50 beverage companies over the last 2 years. We're doing this based off of literally tens of thousands, or I think we probably track about 100,000 beverage companies. So that's what this is based off of. So in preparation for this, I emailed last night an investor in the space named Brad Barnhorn, who I think is one of the best board members a beverage company can have. He's got just a phenomenal track record. And I asked him about what does he think are the things that are most likely to lead to success for a beverage company. And I didn't show him these slides. There wasn't enough time. But one of the things he talked about was innovation. And innovation, not just for innovation's sake, but really focused innovation to make sure that when you're launching something, that product essentially has a reason for being. And this slide and the slide 2 slides ago, I think would kind of be consistent with that concept, that you need to innovate, but you need to make sure that that innovation has a reason for being. So with that, I think we have some questions, but I just wanted to lay out essentially kind of what we do and how we're beginning to use data, and then how you might be able to think about using data as well. But if you take away nothing else, again, what's key to kind of understand is the retailers, the other industry participants are using a tremendous amount of this data.
Please have a seat. I am just fascinated by this. And what I want to first ask is, how much do you think the data correlated with what your experience is as an established investor?
So we have a belief that marrying business judgment with the data is what's critical. So if you think of a lot of, let's say, quant hedge funds don't care to do that. Not all of them, but many of them don't care to do that. What they care about is just if there is a relationship, then it will trade on that. The reason that doesn't work for us, there's a bunch of reasons that doesn't work for us, but one of them is we can't just go to an entrepreneur and say, I know you have this belief, you're wrong, and it's because the data says it, and we don't need to understand why the data says that. It's hard for the entrepreneur then to kind of understand how to use that. So we care a lot about the why behind this, and the why comes out of marrying the data and the technology with business judgment. We try to share this a lot with entrepreneurs, retailers, other industry experts to get their feedback as well.
Now, you weren't here yesterday, but we had someone who's been very successful thus far talk about going against established wisdom, in some case not even thinking about being aware of it, but moving strategically. So I guess what I'm asking is, are there ways to account for scrappiness?
That's a great question. So I guess it would be, I guess the question would be, you mean scrappiness of the entrepreneur?
Yeah.
So we do have a model that looks at the strength of the team, but to be candid with you, it probably doesn't do a great job of hitting that core value. I think that that value is the most important characteristic that any entrepreneur can have. I'll take scrappy over smart any day of the week.
There's some hope for you guys.
No. More hope for me. Hope for me. Scrappiness, I think, is on its own. It leads to other things. So then you kind of think about like, what are the things that it leads to? Those are the things that we're able to measure. But no, we're not able to today get into Jeff's brain and know is he scrappy or not. It's if he's scrappy, then these other things happen. And again, the beautiful thing about consumer is that those things that could happen are out there, and they're publicly available.
Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of changes in the companies that are getting investment on CircleUp and how Helio is affecting that?
Yeah, I think the introduction of Helio, but also just the maturation of this industry, which, regardless of CircleUp, I think probably everyone in this room has seen this. Over the last 5-7 years, smaller brands, meaning brands less than kind of 15, 20 million in revenue, are eating share rapidly. And by the way, like, every strategic is terrified of that. They are terrified by the people in this room. And I would imagine that there's some strategics here who will admit that to you offline. They're terrified because they're losing market share. And that process has led to what I've seen as a lot of different changes over the last kind of 5-6 years. One is that people are beginning to use a lot more data. What's not working is the entrepreneur that just said, this is a better tasting product. It just doesn't work. The better tasting chocolate bar, there's a lot of chocolate bars that say they're the better tasting chocolate bar. So what makes it better tasting? And how could you prove that consumers like it? How could you prove that that actually matters, if it really is better tasting or not? I didn't see that 7 years ago, 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we saw a lot of companies that would have that as the claim. Now it's, well, regardless of whether or not it's better tasting, here's our repeat sales. Here's our distribution expansion. This is how we stack up against the competitive set.
Is that distinctiveness word that you were talking about? I mean, is that where that needs to come into play? It's
I think
not
so,
just
yeah.
better tasting, but it's distinctively better tasting because.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk about, there's two companies up here. One where the package itself, just the ugly truth, just looked different, right? Another where the ingredients themselves were unique. And by the way, I haven't run that through Helio, so I can't say that for sure, but like anecdotally, it looked different.
The impression I got was that Helio was already running it through Helio.
It is. So there are different ways to be unique. Again, the package, the ingredient deck, the nutritional profile, et cetera, the product itself, obviously. But what's key is that there is some sort of differentiation. It is extremely hard to be successful in consumer without something that's unique.
Absolutely.
I would say that's true for any industry, but it's certainly true for this one.
Now, with regard to SKU proliferation, that slide, I thought that was very interesting. I wonder if there's any accountability for the maturity of the brand running against the number of SKUs that caused that downward dip.
There could be. When I was sitting over there, the same data scientist emailed me another slide, which I didn't have time to put in, but essentially just looked at every incremental SKU and then the performance up or down that resulted from the overall ratings. And what it saw is that like every incremental SKU, essentially the ratings do go down. It's a different way to cut very similar data, which probably makes sense to some extent, right? Like it's harder to be as laser focused on product quality on your 11th SKU as it was on your first.
Yeah,
you don't have a company if your first one doesn't work.
Well, there may be though the tail wagging the dog a little bit. We're pivoting to other product types. Mm-hmm. So Could one takeaway here be intense focus on your lead product, making sure that that is powering you forward?
I think that would be what I would take away from it. I think that there's other interpretations as well that are probably also fair. We're trying to marry the data with that business judgment, give the data to others to make their own determinations, but that's probably what I would take away from it, yes.
Now, you started CircleUp, how many?
2012.
Okay, so we're in year 5.
Yes.
How is CircleUp changing?
The biggest way it's changed and continues to change is just the focus on the data itself. So we always had a thesis that technology could be used to evaluate at a high level. It can't evaluate everything, but at a high level, evaluate companies when they would apply to us. And so a company would come to us and would give us, let's say, their financials and other information, and so we would put that into our first algorithm 4 years ago. And what we found is that 8 of the 10 data sets that were most predictive of success were not pieces of information that they would give us. So as an investor, I would have thought the most important things that they would have given us were on the income statement. That wasn't true. It was all the other information, which if you kind of think about it, I guess makes sense, because when a company comes to you and says they went from 1 million in revenue to 3 million in revenue, that might mask the fact that they just lost all of their Whole Foods distribution and replaced you with TJ Maxx. I hope there's no one from TJ Maxx here, but some other lower quality distribution.
We're gonna get them.
Okay. That gets masked, and you start to ask those questions. But the fact that that happened is visible out there, especially if you're tracking the company every single month for years. You can see that that evolution has happened, and that's what Helio can see.
Is that guiding CircleUp's own native investments as well?
Yes. Yeah. We invest and we work with companies that we find and evaluate through Helio. And so we view that as a nice stamp of approval. We evaluate 1.2 million companies a month, and we chose that coconut water. That's how we make investments on behalf of our own funds. We have a series of different funds, as well as putting things in the marketplace.
Is it possible for brands here to access, deploy, use their own Helio data both on your platform and when seeking non-CircleUp based investment?
I'm really glad you asked that. So yes, it's still clunky. So we do it with companies. We had a company last week that said to us, can I take that data and can I give it to a retailer to show them the performance? And we said yes. We want to open source this much more than it has been. The challenge is not around confidentiality or how proprietary it is. The challenge is it's really hard to digest the information. It's very hard to access and understand it for anyone. By the way, this is like for our data scientists, there's a lot. So we're trying to find the right interface so that a beverage company can pull that kind of information themselves and use it. That's exactly what we want. That's consistent with our mission to help entrepreneurs to thrive.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that mission with us, Ryan. That was terrific.
Thank you so much.